All right, just getting ready here, so excuse me while we just take a couple minutes. All right. Great. Hello, Jack. Hello, Isaac. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm just getting ready here, so just give me a couple minutes. But is the sound okay where you are, my friends? Rob, hello. It's good to see you. Sorry, just getting ready here. Just give me 1 second. Great, thank you so much. Sound looks good. Okay. I'm just setting up my computer, and here we go. Tim, greetings, my friend from Germany. It's nice to see you. How are you doing? How are you all doing today? All right, so it's David. Hello from Nashville. Hello. It's nice to see you. Let me just. Sorry about this. Let me just untangle this. I usually do these with a pin mic, so I just want to make sure that the wires aren't. And Kevin, greetings, hello from Texas, from the Texas Panhandle. So hello, Jared, hello, how are you, my friend? Solitaire Ronin, thank you very much. Solitaire Ronin, I'm very sorry, I read your comment on the 8.5 video that I did, and I know that you have a reaction to the film, which I think is very valid, very legitimate, and I hope to address it because it's actually a view that I had of the film when I was, the first time I'd seen the film. So it's I think a film that for me anyway is very, it took me a long time to get into. So I hope, well, actually, I don't think so. I mean, there's nothing wrong with not liking this film or not necessarily engaging with this film at 8.5. You know, we don't have to necessarily, and I'm talking to everyone here. You know, I really believe that we don't necessarily have to call every film in the world, you know, this is a masterpiece, right? But if we really feel like it's a film that doesn't do it for us, I think that's really fine. You know, I think of course the issue, the general issue as far as being online is that if we say something that's maybe not so positive, if we say something not so positive about a film that everyone else seems to like, very much so, it might seem like we are trying on purpose to be contrarian. And I think that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid giving off that impression, I think. So and I'm not saying that you had that at all, Solitaire Road. I'm saying that for me personally, I'm saying that if it's important to try to maybe express negativity about a film while not necessarily trying to be on purpose contrarian. You know, I know some people might feel that way if I say something negative about a film, but I think it's very legitimate to have a negative feeling about a film, very legitimate, and I think it's quite important because, you know, everything, right? You know, in physics, not everything is filled with positive ions. We all also need negative ions in order to create some kind of reaction. So I think the same can be true for our own emotional state and reaction towards cinema. So Solitaire Ronin, I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about this. So well done. Thank you very much, my friend. Anyway, sorry about that. I haven't officially started yet, so I was just talking to my dear friend Solitaire Ronin. And anyway, so let's get going here. So welcome to is this the, I always lose track, is this the third? Is this the third live stream? Oh, fourth, it's a fourth live stream, excuse me. So this is, yes, the fourth live stream film club. And so welcome, greetings from Tokyo. It's really nice to see you. And I hope all of you are doing very well today. And that it's right, so thank you very much for taking the time to stop by and to have have a chance to chat about this film, which is 8.5, Otto e Mezzo. So this is 1963. This is directed by Federico Fellini. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk with you and hear your thoughts and comments about this very intriguing film. I would say, from my point of view, I would say it's pretty tough in many places, especially for me and my approach and also my own background. I've never been to Italy. I don't claim to have a handle on even the sort of general aspects of Italian history and society, and so I probably will not be able to get a lot of those without external assistance from, let's say, Criterion supplements and the like. And so I have no claim of being in any way an authority or even an expert or even a student, if you will, of Italian history or Italian cinema per se. All I know is essentially what I have been able to watch over the years and what I've been able to get from, for example, supplemental material on the Criterion collection discs and the like. And so I'm approaching this as a fan, as someone who has seen this film on a number of occasions and who would like to think that, well, not think, but who I think, let me put it this way, this film has had a particular impact on me and my life, and so I just wanted to hopefully see if I can express that in some way with you today. And likewise, I want to hear what your reactions are and your thoughts and your comments are on this film, because I feel like this film is one that I think can engender quite a wide variety of opinion, which I think can be very varied indeed. So, and as I was trying to allude to before, I think there's nothing wrong with not liking a film and not liking this film. What I try to get at with that is, let's see if we can figure out. What I'm interested in is figuring out, okay, what is it specifically that you find maybe not so appealing, or a little bit difficult, or a little bit hard to understand, or a little bit hard to engage with. I'm very interested to hear those sorts of elements as well, as well as hearing those sorts of elements for people who like the film. I like this aspect, or I like that aspect, or I'm not sure about this aspect, or this aspect didn't quite do it for me, or something like that. That sort of conversation I find incredibly important. So yes, so everything's fair game here. So don't worry about it. You don't necessarily have to like something. So but with that in mind, I will be talking about spoilers, and I will be talking about specific details of this film, including its ending. And so if you haven't seen the film, I strongly urge you now you can just switch off, and then you can come back to this video at any time, because this video will be uploaded onto my YouTube channel here as soon as the live chat is done. So don't worry about that. So it'll always be here, and you can come back to it at any time. Incidentally, the live chat also will be here as well, so you can always scroll down, and I think you can turn on the function where you can actually watch the live chat commence and proceed as the video is proceeding. So that's an interesting function of YouTube, and so there's that. And then I will be periodically addressing comments in the live stream chat as I see them. I will try to focus primarily on this film, so apologies, but I won't be necessarily addressing non-topic comments, and it's hard for me to get to every comment. So if I am remiss, and if I unintentionally go over your comment, or if I miss your comment, please forgive me. It's unintentional, but mistakes happen all the time on my end, so please forgive me and I will do my best to remedy the situation going forward. But if you feel along the way that I have skipped over your comment, please feel free to, you can leave it in the comment section of this video, or you can try to repeat the comment or something, and we'll go from there. And then last but not least, of course, please have fun with each other, and talk with each other, and engage with each other, and hopefully I hope that you can make connections with other fellow film enthusiasts, because I think that it's a really nice group of people. And there we go. So with that in mind, my friends, let us proceed with this film 8.5 as a kind of introductory way of getting into this film. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just talk about how this film generally has affected me, or how I feel about this film now. And let's see if we can get some preliminary discussion going. So 8.5, this is an Italian film, and this is black and white. And it's one of those films that I had to struggle with over many years. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, because when I was maybe a teenager, maybe I must have been, I was a teenager, and this was the first time I had seen 8.5. And at the time, I was just starting to discover these great masterpieces of art house cinema, world cinema. So Fellini was part of that equation. You know, I think that's a lot to do with it's the kind of thing that one hears a lot. You know, Kurosawa, Bergman, Fellini, Antonioni. So that it was that kind of general progression for me, because those are the sorts of films that were easily available to me at the time on VHS tapes that I could rent from a nearby store or video. So that was in many ways a kind of reality for me. And so one of the things I was able to get that my mother rented for me was, I think, 8.5. Or did I see it? Did I see it there, or did I see it in college? Now this always makes, I always forget this. It could have been, you know, now that I think about it, it might have been college, freshman year in college, although that is, I'm starting to blur that in my mind now. But in any event, it was around that time of my life. So I think maybe, oh gosh, must have been 15, 16, 17 years old. Let's do it that, something like that. So it was around that time. So I was still relatively very young, much younger than I am now. And I'm 40 now. So this was the first time I had seen this film. And I think I was certainly ill-equipped, both intellectually and emotionally, to deal with this. I'm not even sure if I'm that equipped to deal with it now, but what I'm saying is I think I was lacking in a lot of life experience at the time I saw this for the first time, and thus it was not a film that I particularly liked. In fact, I hated the film. I loathed the film. I thought the film was a big waste of time, and it was so confusing, and it was so meandering and ponderous. And I thought, I don't care about this main character. Who cares? Why should I care about this main character? And that's how I felt about the film for a while there, at least. And I never quite understood what was going on, and that generally left an impression upon me vis-a-vis Fellini's work as a whole. And as I got into college and explored more Fellini's films, I kind of liked La Strada and some of his earlier variety lights, Il Bidone and films like that. But I wasn't really into the other grand Fellini-esque films, starting with La Dolce Vita, and in particular 8.5, and everything after 8.5 was a little bit difficult for me when I was going through college. But I don't know, maybe it wasn't slowly but surely, I think, but I think it was sometime after I had myself, I graduated from college, I left the nest, as it were, and I tried to stake a little, to make a little bit of myself in the real world. And along the way, I started to settle down, and when I was much older, I watched this film again, and it really did something for me that time. And I think by that time I had a little bit more life experience under my belt. I had a little bit more experience in terms of, let's say, relationships, in terms of work, in terms of struggling and having all the stresses of a work life, of that kind of everyday life. And I don't claim to be an artist or a director like Guido is here, or Federico Fellini, and all that. But I do understand, or I did understand at the time, at least through the lens of my own personal experience, as someone who's trying to do some maybe, I think essentially what I'm trying to say is maybe I was a little bit more world weary, and it was through that, in that context, that I watched this film again, and it really stuck with me in a very profound way. And from then on, it was essentially a film that it blossomed in my heart. And I think it blossomed in my heart primarily because it was the struggle of the hero of this film, Guido Anselmi. And again, I don't identify with his struggle as a film director or as an artist, because that's not my position, that's not my where I am in my life. But I do see some elements of his, the way in which, I mean, obviously, here we're talking about four things in essence, which I think is really well outlined in the comments that are made by Gideon Bachman on the Criterion supplement, the Criterion the commentary track. And he says that he was not only an expert in Fellini, but he was also a friend of Fellini, and he actually appears as in the sequence at the end with all the press conference. He appears, he's seen holding a camera for one brief instance. So I would consider him to be very expert, Gideon Bachman. And according to him, he said, part of his friendship and his conversations with Fellini, he said, there are four things, right? There's family. What is it? No, I'm sorry. There are four things, right? Friendship, love, sex, and marriage. Right? Friendship, love, sex, and marriage. And right, regarding these four things, they have nothing in common. These four things: friendship, love, sex, and marriage. They have nothing in common. So I'm paraphrasing that. And so I think that is the essence, if you will, of 8.5 and of Guido Anselmi's struggle. And but also in many aspects, it's very easy, or it's very interesting to see that exploration, and how it might be something that I can engage with, or I can maybe understand, or maybe I can sort of sense or feel as I too grow older. So I'm not saying that I'm entirely like Guido Anselmi's character here, but what I am saying is that there are certain aspects where I can sort of see and sort of understand more, and sort of try to appreciate more as I gain more in my own life experiences. And that's my own personal approach to 8.5 and how it affects me. And so that's just a general outtake, or just a general approach that I have. So before we go into specifics, let me just address you all in the comments here very quickly. So so Nazarene Prod, hello, and Sehofen, hello. It's nice to see you. Paul, hello, in Kansas. It's nice to see you. And Rob says, yes, the Laserdisc. So yes, this is the Laserdisc from Criterion Collection. It has the trailer, I think, but there's nothing in terms of a commentary track or anything. It's just the trailer, I think. Oops. And let's see here. Retroplayer 72, hello. And SJS Films, hello. And Solitaire Ronin Film says it has enough. The film has enough to intrigue me into repeat viewings. And Jack Clare, yes, Jared Wignall says, Eight and a Half is such a unique film. I remember watching it for the first time years ago and finding it to be very good, yet it took me a few more viewings to begin to really appreciate the film. Transport and Stuff 808, hello, how are you? Nice to see you. Lou Friend says your feed isn't strong, breaking up. Oh, I hope that's okay. I hope it should. I hope it's the connection is okay where you are. Looks. I hope other people aren't having any issues as well. Peter Caciola, hello, and Dave B, hello from Western New York, and Lockjeb, hello. This is I enjoyed it a lot. The only Fellini I've seen so far. And Reese, hello. Oh gosh, a lot of people here. Great, great. Okay, so Retro Player 72 says, I must admit, I have heard and read how important this film is and have seen that it is in the top 10 of a lot of directors' films. But after my first viewing, I can see that repeat viewings are needed. Yes, I agree. I agree. That is how I felt with this film. Repeat viewings are needed. You know why? Because it goes along with the style. And let me just, this is a nice way, Retro Player 72, for me to get in here. There is something very breezy about its style and its approach, right? Because we see all these, essentially they're extras that populate the frame. Let's take as an example one of the, let's take an example, the first few sequences in the film. We open up and we're not given any indication directly that the first thing that we see is a dream sequence, right? This is Guido's very famous dream sequence. It cuts immediately to the shot of the back of his head, right, as he's in the car and the car stalling because they're in the traffic jam. We don't get a sense that this is a dream sequence, but we kind of know it's a dream sequence. I think, for one, there are some strange and absurd and slightly weird elements that pop up as the sequence is ongoing. For instance, we see all the heads and the feet hanging out from the window in the bus, and we see some kind of oddly placed still shots and the like. And then we suddenly see smoke emerging, and then we suddenly see him doing a kind of random gesture with cleaning the window or something. So we see all these elements that seem off, but we don't understand, or at least I don't appreciate that it can be a dream sequence until he is suffocating so much that he emerges from the top of the car and then he flies off, right? And he flies through the sky. And then we're transported through space and maybe time even, and we see him. We see figures on a beach and all that stuff. So that's how and then it ends, and then we see the arm reach up from the bed, and we are in the hotel room of I think it's the spa or hotel room, and that's when we know that this is a dream sequence. And then from there we have a very interesting sequence involving the doctors and the nurse coming into the hotel room, and we see a lot of people talking over each other, and then we see the writer, the film critic come in, and he's wanting to give advice about Guido's latest work, and then we see Guido, but we don't necessarily see him yet because we see the back of his head, or we hear him talk, but we don't necessarily see him and his face yet. So all these basically separate and distinctly disparate elements are all coming together in a way they're not necessarily converging, right? We're not totally into what the doctors are saying. We don't quite have the context of what the critic is saying, and we don't have a shot of our main character, Marcello Mastroianni. And so I think from the very get-go, it's very disorientating. It's hard to know where we are, what's going on. But upon repeat viewings, I think it's a little bit easier to get one's bearings. And then let's just cut to another sequence that I think is magnificent, which is the after we get Guido going into the bathroom, and he turns on the light, and we see his face for the first time reflected in the mirror. It's very old and tired and very worn. It's not anything like the idol, the handsome Marcello Mastroianni that we would come to expect as a first shot in the film. It's very tired and he's just woken up and he's got bags under his eyes. So it's a very, I would say, shocking image. And then the light comes on and then it's sort of dim and then suddenly flashes brightly to show this wide expanse of a bathroom. It's such a big bathroom, by the way. I'm so shocked by how big that bathroom is. And then we start hearing the Wagner on the film score. And then we cut to that very interesting shot of I think it's the spring, right? And we see this is the place where people line up to drink the spring water. And so we see slowly, right, the camera slowly sort of track, and it tracks from right to left. So it tracks from right to left slowly. And then as we see this, we see people walking from right to left. We follow them, or we see people. These are all more or less elderly people who are coming here to drink the waters. And then people come and then they leave, and then as the camera keeps moving, it picks up another character that's walking right to left, and then that character leaves, and then it picks up someone in the foreground who's just talking, and then it leaves that person to pick up someone else who's walking, and it just does that kind of thing, and then cuts, and then we go back, and there's another camera move, but this time it goes from left to right, and it has that same similar thing, and we see movement as the camera picks up a particular character in the background, maybe walking from this time left to right, and it picks up someone in the foreground who's twirling her parasol, and then going back to someone who's walking right to, and then all that progresses, and then we see the expanse, and then we see someone conducting what we assume to be maybe a mini band or an orchestra. I'm not sure. But it seems out of place. Why would a conductor be here? It doesn't seem necessarily real. And then we finally realize that this is people lining up to drink the waters. And then we see the element of the women who are serving the water, pouring the water in the glass and giving it to the people. They're all dressed in white. And then we see Guido there in his really iconic dark. It looks black, right? It's a black and white film, so it looks like a black suit with his white shirt and tie and his glasses, his iconic sunglasses. And then we have Wagner on. We have Wagner, right? But it's basically these people just lining up to drink water. So it's not a very, how should I put it? To be perfectly frank, it doesn't necessarily seem that compelling. It seems almost kind of mundane, people just lining up to do something. But then we get Rossini intruding upon the score there, and then we see the introduction of Claudia Cardinale, and she comes basically out of nowhere, and so we don't get a sense of what this is, but we understand after repeat viewings that this seems to be a vision or a kind of a dream sequence that Guido is experiencing, right, as a kind of vision of a real beauty, a kind of unattainable beauty that she will be throughout the film. At least the image or the vision of Claudia that Guido has. So this is very much a disorienting way of introducing the film. And then from here we get the meeting with the film critic writer, and then he starts with the glasses, and he starts to give his very sort of erudite-like approach on Guido's latest work, and he's basically criticizing it like crazy. It's really pummeling him artistically, and he's written notes, and these little scribbled notes that Guido will read later and he'll throw away, but then he'll pick up, and then he sees his friend Mezzobota with his young girlfriend, the Barbara Steele character, and all this stuff is going on, which is so disorienting. But when we see it again, and when I see it again, and I see it again and again, and I have a general sense of what's going on upon the repeated viewing, I can see the artistry at work with for instance, the way in which characters weave in and out of the frame, like it's amazing when you look at the film again. Just look how the characters weave in and out, how the camera follows a character that is essentially superfluous or not directly significant to this particular narrative of 8.5. We just see a stand-in or an extra, basically, and then the film, and then the camera just pans this way or moves that way, and it's really quite a how should I put it? It's a real tour de force, because there are so many levels of movement. There's already so many levels of sound design, and there are already so many levels of confusion within the frame that at once we see that we are in a very strange world indeed. And it's a very, I think, it's a world filled with a lot of beautiful people, a lot of maybe scary people, a lot of people that say stuff that we don't understand. There are things that are said that are not necessarily pleasant, and there are things that are heard that are very beautiful. And there are all these, there's this wonderful mixture of stuff that's going on within the frame and as we hear it. So that's within the frame. But already, we are already seeing what I think is really lovely. We're seeing now the fact that the film will basically, without any warning, cut to a vision or a dream sequence of Guido. And we won't get any warning because he'll probably be just standing there and we'll see a vision. And sometimes we might even see a vision that occurs while he's there. So in other words, he might experience a vision with Guido within the frame. So it's not like we're getting a first-person perspective all the time. So he's within the world as we experience his vision. So that's an interesting aspect. We also sometimes see his perspective as something occurs. So for instance, the first time we see Claudio Cardinale emerge from the distance there, I think it's from his perspective, although I could be wrong. And so there's already that sense of confusion. So the film is operating, I think, on a kind of a three-dimensional basis that way there. You know, he is there, but also we're seeing his experience through first person's perspective, and then we're seeing all these layers going on. And so that adds to a confusion, but it also adds to this kind of challenge. When I see it, I think, oh, okay, this time I'm going to try to make sure I get everything, and I'm trying to make sure when I see the film, who is this character that I'm seeing at the film on this in the frame at the moment and all that. I always try to play that game, and I fail miserably all the time because it's just so overwhelming. It's like a sea or a wave of information and characters that's just crashing, in my mind. It's just wonderful. We should say also that the camera work is by the cinematographer Gianni Di Venanzo. Please remember that name, Gianni Di Venanzo. So, right, it's an incredible thing. But let me then just before I forget, let me say also that this is just also an example of how this film, what grammar is going to be, right? Because it's going to be a film that has right. I forget one other thing about the sequence, which is very important. So with respect to the spa or the spring, the sequence where people are lining up and drinking the waters, right? They are all more or less rather elderly. There are not many young people there that we will see later in the nightlife in the town, when the people with the producer then go off in the nightlife and drive to the spaceship, right? They meet Louisa, and that's later in the film. So all these are they're pretty elderly, and but we understand this to be a kind of reality or the real life. But we have already seen the real life and the dreams and the visions interact with each other in a very kind of odd way and a strange way, and they merge in a very strange way. So already we're seeing this dichotomy between dreams and reality, or reality as we kind of understand it to be in this film. Okay, so that's one aspect that I think is very, very important. Another aspect already that we've seen is this, again, something that goes towards the three-dimensionality of this film, which is past, present, and maybe a future or a conditional or something. According to the commentary, Fellini liked to think of this film as being about the past, the present, and not the future, but the conditional. Okay, but if we think about that sense, the temporal aspects of this film, right? I think they're on display here. Right? We saw a little bit of. We see the present, obviously, with Guido and the springs, and we see the present with him waking up and the situation in the hotel and all that, and his essential creative block or writer's block, if you want to call it that. Although I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. So it's the present, right? But we also see aspects of the past already, right? Because we see in the dream sequence, we see certain aspects of Guido's past that we will see again later, and we will come to realize represent Guido's past and his childhood. We also see these old people in the springs, and while this represents the present, they seem to be dressed up in a way that is suggestive of some kind of past, right? They're not necessarily modern in terms of their dress. And I think this point is being made in the commentary rather astutely. So already, even within the world of the present, we're getting glimpses into the past. And we will see later in the film how aspects of the future or the conditional creep in when we see, for instance, people like the old the producer's associate, Canokia, who is the friend of Guido. He says he's getting old and he might be put out to pasture or something like that. So it's sort of a foreshadowing, perhaps, of Guido and his resisting getting old or something like that. And that's just an example, I think, of how the film treats Guido's future or his conditional. It treats his past, it deals with his past, his present, and also his future, conditional. And so therefore, I think this film not only operates within the frame as being something that is very kinetic and frenzied, and operating on many levels of confusion within the frame itself, but is also operating, I think, three-dimensionally, or not three-dimensionally, but also temporally, in terms of it's dealing with the past, the present, and the future, sometimes within the same frame or same sequence, which is very exciting. And also, if you want to think about another aspect of this film that's really fascinating, right? This film is understood to be something that maybe is very close to Fellini, right? The story is, or the legend of this film is that Fellini was in a situation that is not dissimilar to that in which Guido finds himself. He's a filmmaker, he's trying to make a film about something, he's using elements of his life perhaps. And so we see that this film is not only a film about Guido and his story, but we can see, or we can understand, that perhaps there are many elements of Fellini's life and his art that are reflected in here. And we also see Guido making the film, or at least making the aspects of the film that I think are embodied so well in that famous scene towards the end with the screen tests. Remember that? They're in the dark theater and everyone's watching the screen tests, and it's so painful because Guido's there and also Luisa is there by now. And so she is there watching these screen tests, and the screen tests are for the characters that look like the character. Well, there's the character that is going for the role that is obviously based on the character of Carla, the Sandra Milo character, and also there's a character or the actress shown going for the role that is obviously the wife, Luisa, the Anouk Aimée character. And so that's such an interesting moment because the film, 8½, the universe, the world of that people are watching the film, and then we in turn are watching the film of them watching the film. So there is already a three-dimensionality that's going on there, which is very fascinating. So not only do you have stuff going within the frame, we have stuff that is dealing with temporal aspects or time. We also have stuff that is dealing with the three-dimensionality of filmmaking in general. Right, so it's how should I put it? It's like there's an x-axis, there's a y-axis, and there's also a z-axis. upon which I think this film operates. And perhaps there might even be more axes going on, but that's how so therefore I think this film is super super complicated to watch on a single viewing. And kudos, congratulations to anyone who can get this film on a first viewing. Really, it's amazing. But for me, I've seen it so many times and I still don't understand. There are many aspects I still cannot wrap my head around. But that's my how I see it as a kind of approach. But before I get ahead of myself, let me just address the comments here, and I apologize because my comments will probably be a little bit delayed from the chat, but please forgive the delay, and I'll just do the best as I can. So anyway, Transport and Stuff 808 says, there's something so iconic about the film. It's not my favorite Fellini film. That would either be Amarcord or Satyricon. Gray 1951, hello my dear friend Gray 1951. Gray 1951, I love your channel, by the way. I love the film, but I agree that it opens up more and more with repeated viewings. Justin Peterson, hello. I first saw 8.5 thanks to William Friedkin recommending it in several YouTube videos. It is one of my favorite Fellinis so far, along with Amarcord. Solitary Ronin film asks, do you need to watch other Fellini films to appreciate it more? Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I don't think so. Although I do. I mean, I don't want to talk about it too much, but I do think that La Dolce Vita, in particular, has a really strong thematic connection with this film. There are interesting parallels. I'm not sure if they're done on purpose, but there are a lot of interesting parallels between La Dolce Vita and 8.5. I don't want to go into too much, lest I spoil La Dolce Vita, but anyway. But I don't think you have to watch a lot of Fellini films first. But let's see. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to skip around here. Justin Peterson says, I am convinced that Quentin Tarantino was inspired to put the twist scene into Pulp Fiction because of the dance scene early in this film. Okay, so the dance scene I think you're referring to in 8.5 is the scene just before the magician and the clairvoyant come on. So this is the scene where Gloria Morin and Mario Mazzobotta are dancing. So it's the elderly man and his very, very young girlfriend, played by Barbara Steele. Is that the scene you're talking about? Because I think they're, in particular, Barbara Steele is dancing quite well in that. So yes. Sorry, I'm just going over the okay, so Lockjeb says it's definitely a bit hard to swallow if you're used to modern Hollywood movies with formulaic plot structures, but once you get past that, it's awesome. Once you get past that, it's awesome how dreamlike it is. Yes, so it does weave in and out with its dreamlike structure, and there are so many. What I love about it too is it as I said, it goes into its dreams or its visions almost without warning and immediately, and we get, for instance, when we kind of understand that it's a dream already because just how absurd and how nonsensical and how illogical and how impossible it would have been in terms of physics, right? Because, for instance, after and sometimes it's kind of easy to figure out, for instance, after the liaison or after Carla comes to town and Guido takes Carla to the hotel that she's going to stay at. It's a different hotel, as you know, and they have their little time together. And we already get glimpses of what Guido likes in terms of his sexual tastes, and what he says to her, I want your eyebrows to be, what does he say? He wants them to be kind of dirtier and rougher. And I think what he is implying there is he wants her to have this look that we will, I think, associate later with Saragina. Saragina, and so that is, and Carla, I think, has traits that I think remind us of Saragina that we will understand later in the film. But what was I saying? So yes, so sometimes, and then after that, we see them in bed, and she's reading the comic and eating and laughing, and while he's sleeping, and it goes to his dream about his parents and about they're in the graveyard and how his father's very disappointed that the grave is not as nice as he would have liked it to be, and he seems to be not being able to getting answers. He's asking questions, but the father, who we assume is now deceased, is not providing answers. There's also the mother, and there's also these two other gentlemen that approach that we don't know who they are, but we later realize are the film producer and Konokia in his white polo T-shirt, and then we see the mother, and the mother embracing Guido, who is now dressed in some kind of uniform, which we understand later to be his uniform as a child in the Catholic school. But he's hugging his mother, who then turns into Anouk Aimée, who we will understand to be Louisa, who is his wife. And so there are some times where I think the film enters into a dream that I think is very easy to understand and comprehend. But there are other moments in the film where we watch it and we're not quite sure if it's a dream or not. For example, a film that I think is a little bit of both is the scene where they're going into the steam rooms, right? They're going down, and it's this really, really weird procession of people who are dressed up in these towels that look like togas, and they're going down these stairs and the steam and into the steam rooms, and we see all these people, and they're all lined up, and there's big procession music, and it's very reminiscent, if you will, of the scene earlier in the film, at the very beginning of the film, where they're taking the waters. Well, now they're going into the steam rooms. And and it also will remind us later at the very end when people are proceeding down the steps from the big constructed spaceship that was never to be at the end sequence of the film. But what was I saying? So yes, that scene is very important, right? Because in terms of the narrative, because that's where we see Guido talking with the cardinal for the second time. And the cardinal says something very interesting. He said, there is no salvation outside of the church. But right, he talks with the cardinal, or Fellini decides to have this very seemingly important discussion between Guido and the cardinal in the steam room. And not only in the steam room which is introduced in a way that's very weird and very Baroque and very disorienting, with these people walking down this huge, fast-paced Nino Rota music. And then what's going on, and you have the steam and this odd thing, and the commentary track makes a parallel to like a descent into hell. I don't necessarily see it quite in those terms, but I can understand where that's coming from, yes, because it does feel like there's hot and heat, and people don't look happy, people look sad. We actually see Mesabota, who doesn't respond when Guido when Guido says hello, and then when we see the cardinal, he's always distant and he's kind of naked, and we see him talking, but it's kind of an unnatural situation, and so it's really weird. So that feels like a dream sequence, or it feels like a dream wrapping itself around an otherwise real sequence, if you know what I mean. And so I understand, I really love this idea of the film being like a dreamlike structure. I really, really appreciate that. Before I go on, I'm sorry I'm not addressing the comments as much as I would like, but I apologize. I really want to say this before I forget. I mentioned the character of Carla, and I mentioned the character of Louisa, and there were other characters. So this film is, right, one of the primary aspects of this film is Guido and his relationships with women. And there are a number of women here. I think the two, or maybe, actually there are a number, actually. So let's try to think of these relationships. And if I miss any, please mention them in the comments. But of course, let's start with his relationship with Louisa, his wife. And then there's a relationship with his mistress, Carla. And I love these two actors, by the way, Anouk Aimée as Louisa and Sandra Milo as Carla. I find their performances to be so great, so contrasting with each other. It's really, really great, you know. Sandra Milo, she has such great comic timing. It's really fantastic. And when she emerges with this, with all her bags, she has 5 bags, and she's dressed up in this way and this garish hat that's so big, right? When she goes to the hotel, she's walking in that. I don't know if you caught this, but there's that great moment when she's walking and her hat hits, I think, like a little string or something hanging from, maybe it's a little light or something that hanging, and then she turns and she's smiling. Oh, you know, I love that moment. That's such a charming moment. And also the way she uses onomatopoeic sounds in her speech, because she likes to read a lot of comics. You know, like in comics you have like these things, in English it would be like zap and bang and all that stuff. Or here she says yak and sgulp, and that's a really great one, sgulp. S-G-U-L-P. I love sgulp. I love that word. And so and I love her, and she's always laughing and smiling even as she's saying these really horrific things, like she's eating chicken and she's laughing as she's talking about her dream that she had about how her husband discovered them, the two of them, and then he killed them in her dream. And how did he kill them? He killed them with a broom. That's a really horrific image, but she's just nonchalantly saying this, and she's nonchalantly saying, can you find him a job and all this stuff. So she's so, oh gosh, I love that character. And you know that she based on how Guido reacts to her, he is already starting to get tired of her. And well, there's that. So there's Carla, and also there is Rosella, who's Louisa's friend, and also there is Claudia Cardinali, who represents some kind of image of ideal beauty or unattainable beauty. And there are also people, the French actress, Madeleine LeBeau, the French actress who's trying to get a role and trying to understand what her role is. You know, how many scenes will her character have in the film? And Guido says, 5, right? Right. So he has no idea, of course. And then also there is the Gloria Morin, who's the young girlfriend of Mezzabota, and also there is oh gosh, why am I blanking on her name? Please forgive me. Caterina Barato, yes, Caterina Barato, who is this mysterious unknown woman, who's obviously the very famous Caterina Barato of early Italian cinema, and then apparently she was retired or semi-retired, but then she returned in 8½, and she's this image of beauty, but not a kind of ethereal beauty like Claudia Cardinali seems to represent. She's a more earthy beauty, I would say, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, she's in the space of the reality, and she wanders, and she's not known. She doesn't. She's not associated with the film apparently, and she's a stranger to Guido. But Guido sees her in the hotel lobby, and obviously he's struck by her enough that he remembers her enough that she is part of the harem sequence. And also there's an image of the Virgin Mary in the sequence where Guido is a little child after he has been punished for visiting Saragina, and he's been caught visiting Saragina, and he goes into the confessional, and the priest says that, don't you know that Saragina is the devil? And he emerges from the confessional, and we see a shot of the statue of the Virgin Mary. And in fact, the commentary makes the point that the Virgin Mary's face is the face of Caterina Barato. So if that's the case, then Caterina Barato is another example of this maybe unattainable beauty that that Guido has. So, and then I mentioned Saragina. Of course, there's Saragina, Saragina, and Saragina's Rumba, which is perhaps one of the most exciting moments in a film ever. And I'll get to that moment in a second because I think it's deserving of its own little discussion. And then there are, gosh, I mean, there are so many, right, that we see later in the dream sequence where all the women are assembled, obviously. And we see Jacqueline Bonbon, who is the cabaret singer, who is unfortunately over the age limit, which is a very shocking sequence in and of itself. And then we see other women. Of course, there's Guido's mother, and the actress is actually played by the wife of Victoria De Sica. And we also see other women from his childhood. We see an elderly woman who we assume is his grandmother. And it's a very interesting thing because his grandmother in the dream sequence has a very thick Italian accent or a dialect that, according to the commentary, was difficult even for Italians to understand upon viewing the film. So it has a very heavy dialect. But I also understand from the commentary track, or not the commentary track, but from the photography still section, that is one of the supplements on this really great Blu-ray. You should check it out. It's one of those sections where you push the forward button to go from still to still. But there are some interesting snippets of information that are embedded in that photography supplement, and you should take a look. And one of the bits of information was many of the photographs are assembled by someone named Dina Boyer. And Dina Boyer wrote, it was the 200 days of 8½. And she was on set, she was taking pictures, and then she wrote this book which is an account about the production of 8½. Now, that book is a little bit hard to get, and I haven't been able to read it, but according to Dina Boyer, which is information that's included in the supplement, that old lady who played the grandmother was apparently this Southern American woman who had this very kind of thick Southern American accent. So it was interesting, according to Dina Boyer, how she described it. She says, and I'm paraphrasing, she says, it was interesting to be on set to see this woman who's this old grandmother playing this old Italian woman with a heavy Italian dialect accent be played by an actress who is American and who had a voice that was from the Tennessee hills. And so I thought that was really lovely. So anyway, so there, and then of course we get more images from women that we've never seen before who are assembled in the harem sequence. And so this film is primarily about Guido and his relationship with women. Now, query, if you will, whether this film is in some ways misogynistic, and query whether this film is in any ways kind of maybe sort of insulting in a way, because there are readings and there are interpretations of this film that can suggest that the film seems to be treating women in a not so good way, because it's compartmentalizing certain women and their roles, right? Their roles or their relationship vis-a-vis Guido, or how he would like to see them ideally, which is very sort of, he is in a place of domination, and he is basically controlling them, and they are looking after his every wish and fantasy. And so, at least the way he would like to see it, right? And that is exemplified in the very famous the harem sequence, right? So, so query whether this film is in any way sort of negative in that sense. And I can certainly understand that kind of reading of this film, that it's a, you know, it's a poor depiction of the female or the female perspective, for to put a lack of a better phrase. And so therefore this film should is that's one of the critical aspects of this film, or that's a weakness, a critical weakness of this film. So I understand that very much so, and I can totally get that reading. And I can totally understand anyone who has that kind of approach to this film, or a similar approach to this film. So definitely, for sure. But I would suggest also as a way, as maybe further consideration of that particular approach, would be also keep in mind too that even within that very famous sequence of all the women in Guido's life assembled in this old house, and all they care about is him and what he's doing, and all the women in his life and his fantasies and his image and his dreams are assembled. Even the young dancer that they saw in Hawaii, but and Caterina Barato is there as well. She's so concerned about a cut that he's had on his finger, um, uh, cream or balm or something like that. But right, so what was I saying? So, but within that, right, two very key things happen. One, the women revolt, right? The women revolt. Granted, it's maybe a little bit of a playful revolt, but they revolt all the same against Guido. And he tries to fight back with the whip and all that, and it's a pretty, I mean, from one way of looking at it, it's a pretty horrific image of this man whipping these women. It's really quite horrific. But there is a revolt that's going on, and I think that's very significant because it's taking place within the space of this world, which is the dream, which is the vision that Guido seems to be having, right? And remember where it comes up. The vision of the harem comes up right after Carla comes to the little cafe where Guido and Luisa and Rosella are sitting. They're in that little table, and they're the only ones there. And then Carla comes in that really overly ornate horse carriage, and she comes in, and then she notices them there, and then she's so nervous. What is she going to do? So she has this little comic thing with her legs, but then she decides to sit down, seemingly nonchalantly, but she knows exactly what's going on. Then we see a close-up of Anuka Mae's face, and she notices Carla there, and you can see her nostrils flare, and she's so angry. And this is the reason why she has been so upset during this trip, because the assumption being that she saw Carla in the streets the previous night, and that's what made her mood so foul all of a sudden. But then it's from here that we get the dream sequence that Guido has of all the women in his life, right? But so it's a dream sequence. So it should be a kind of idealization of what Guido wants in his life, right? But on the contrary, it's not, because they revolt. So I think that's very significant, right? Because the women are revolting against him within his dreams. So it's like, even within his dreams, not everything is perfect. And it's very interesting also that the person that instigates the revolt in that sequence is none other than Saragina. So make of that what you will. But also, the second thing that I think is very significant about that sequence is the fact of Jacqueline Bonbon, the cabaret singer, who is being forced to go upstairs. And this is a very dark part of this sequence. Would you not agree, my friends? The music has this really creepy, I don't know, synthesizer or organ-like thing going on there. And all the women are suddenly still and silent and not reacting. Sure, there are some people who might be doing something out of sympathy, in particular Carla. Can't you give her an extension, she asks, but there are no exceptions given. And suddenly the demeanor of Marcello Mastroianni is so cold and so scary in its authoritarian nature. He's basically ordering her to her doom, basically. And even as she's given one last hurrah, one last attempt or one last ability to show off her stuff, as it were, to give her dance and to do one last routine, her pearls fall off and she's just a mess. She's just falling apart. And it's a real pathetic depiction of this person, right? And this person, yes, is an embodiment of something that Guido saw. So she's not even a real person, right, in the context of the film. It's within this fantasy. And yet she is being treated in this way that is so horrible. I'm filled with so much sympathy with Jacqueline Bonbon as she goes up. And that is, I think, a very dark moment. And the fact that it occurs within his fantasy is striking and it's telling. And I think it's something that is definitely worth discussing if one has the criticism against this film, that this film is maybe looking at, right, that there's a maybe it's not taking the a certain aspect of these female characters' experiences into fruition. Well, I think that is a very telling moment in that vision. And let me just say, as a related moment, it's not in the same vision, but it's in the end sequence where all the people are gathering around the structure, and people are dancing, and Guido is directing, and we see all the characters assembling, and they're going to do their little procession. But before that, Guido sees some people walking through, and one of the people that calls out to him is Carla. She says "Sigulp," her characteristic Sigulp, and she says, something like, so now I understand, you can't live without us. And then Guido has no time for her. She says, "Oh, fine, go to your place," or something. And then he just leaves her. And so Carla, and then you see that moment where Carla's so dejected and so disappointed, and she feels so alone. It's only for a second, but she just feels so kind of really almost, it's so sad. She's this really sad woman at that moment. And it's for a fleeting moment, but that's another example. That's another Jacqueline Bonbon moment, if you will, that occurs at the very end. And of course, she becomes peppy and lively again when Ian Dallas, the magician, calls her, and then he escorts her to the front of the procession, of course, and everything is fine and dandy. But there's that moment even where Carla realizes, or at least realizes where she is being rejected. And this is interesting too. Is that the real Carla, or is that the Carla, the imaginary world that is being concocted by Guido? I mean, I would say that on the face of it, it looks like it's the imaginary world, because everything is, all the characters are in one space. But I don't know, by this point, which is the end of the film, everything seems to be a hodgepodge of stuff. So it could be the real Carla, it could be the imaginary Carla, it could be something else. It could be Sandro Milo, I don't know, and her relationship with Fellini. And that's an interesting story in and of itself. And if you haven't seen the interview with Sandro Milo on this Criterion supplement, or Criterion Blu-ray, you really have to. It's fascinating. Anyway, I'm sorry, I just went off like crazy there. I apologize. So let me now go to the chat and see what other comments are emerging. So anyway, I'm going to skip over some of the comments. So if I skip over yours, I apologize. Gray 1951 says, "My Fellini experience is limited, but La Dolce Vita is another film that needs to be seen several times, for me at least." Yes, and I'm going to say this in a way that I don't want to spoil the great La Dolce Vita, and this is not a discussion about La Dolce Vita in any way, and so I'm going to try to be as vague as possible about La Dolce Vita, but I really have to say this. That film, I always see La Dolce Vita and 8.5 to be like a yin and a yang almost, because they have the same actors in similar roles, but they're not so similar. There are situations that seem similar, but then are really different. Guido flying through the air. I mean, it's not a statue. It's not a statue of Christ, but it's Guido flying in the air. We see Anouk Aimée, but she's in a different role, etc. And we're going through the city, this nightscape. It's not the Springs, but it's Rome or something like that. So there are all these parallels that are that, but that aren't, if you know what I mean. So they are, but they aren't. And there's one moment in particular that I think is so telling, and I'm going to be as vague as possible. Okay, La Dolce Vita has a moment where a character goes like this, right? Remember, like this. In 8.5, at the end, the sequence, remember the scene or the moment where Guido is, all the people are gathering towards, in the end, to make that procession at the end. It's the end of the film. And Guido's in the center, and he's trying to direct everyone. And we see first Mezzabotta and Gloria walking towards us this way, and then they leave, and then suddenly we see the mother and the father the parents of Guido walking towards the other way. And all of this is happening, we see Saragina standing there in the distance, just looking at us and looking at Guido, almost lovingly. But we see the parents walking away, and that's so significant. They're walking away from Guido, and Guido says, "Mama." And the father doesn't respond. He's walking away, but the mother stops and turns, and she's like, "Should I go to you, my son, or should I stay with my husband?" And she goes like this, and then she walks away with the father, and she leaves Guido alone. And Guido himself is rejected, because you see him from the back of his head kind of hang his head in what must be a moment of sadness for him. But that moment, her going like this, it reminds me so much of a moment in La Dolce Vita where a character goes like this. Ah, yes, gosh, the parallels between those two films are just so beautiful and stunning. Anyway, let me return to the chat here. And again, I'm going to skip over. Dylan Prince, hello. Yes. Great. Nice to see you. And Solitaire Ronin says, Barbara Steele is phenomenal in this film. Yes, she plays Gloria Morin, the girlfriend of Mario Mezzabota. And so, yes, she is really great. I love how she's speaking Italian and English, and it's kind of a mix. Let's see. Isaac Dunn says, along with Persona, it could be my favorite opening. Yes, it's a very powerful opening. I'm sorry, I'm just skipping over. I'm just going like, gosh. Oh man, I hate when I do this. I try to scroll down, but then I go down to the very end, so I apologize. Okay, just keep going here. That's a great conversation as always, by the way, my friends. Really great. Okay. Let's see. Okay, and I'm seeing more people join. So Kevin, right? Kevin is here, and it's Anita Bong hit 2.0. Hello, my friend. That Nino Rota score is heavenly. Yes, it is great. I have the soundtrack. I have it on CD, and I also have it downloaded on my phone, and I listen to it regularly. I really love that. I love that. I love the music. One of the pieces of music that I really love that's unfortunately not on the soundtrack is the rumba, Saragina's rumba, and it's not on the soundtrack, and so it's unfortunate because that's one of the sequences that really is so important for me. So before I forget, that this comment reminds me of Saragina's rumba, so I really have to make a point of that sequence. Okay, so Saragina's rumba comes, I think, around the middle of the film, more or less. So gosh, where does it come in the sequence? Okay, so remember there. So let's think about the film in its sequence. And if I get the sequence wrong, please correct me in the chat. I'm just recalling from memory here. But okay, so Guido comes home, and from the night after, he's been out, and they had that sequence with the magician, and Ian Dallas, and the clairvoyant Maya, and that's another sequence that I'll get to in a moment, right? Asa Nisi Masa, very important. Asa Nisi Masa. But so there's that sequence, and then he comes home, and I'm not home, but he comes to the hotel, and he has the vision of Claudia, and Claudia says a very famous, or not very famous, but very important line. I want to clean. I want to make things clean. I want to bring order and stuff. And then that cuts to the scene where Guido is called to Carla's hotel because Carla has a fever. And so Carla's in bed, and she's sick, and she's sweating, and she has chills. And so he's trying to take care of her, but that he doesn't want to be there. And then that cuts to the scene where he's walking in the woods. I think it's the next day, perhaps, or perhaps in the morning. And he's talking with the cardinal for the first time. And Cardinal doesn't seem to be giving answers to what Guido's seeking. And he's talking about the birds and the bird song, and they're just sitting there just listening to the bird song. And then we see Guido look, and then we see Guido look, and what he's looking at is this woman, this, I think, peasant woman carrying a basket, walking down the hill barefoot. And this seems to trigger a memory in Guido, which is, we assume to be the memory of Guido and his childhood as a young boy in Catholic school. And then we're seeing it's very much, the religious aspect is imposed here quite strikingly. But then we see that the boys run off and they say, let's go see Saragina. So they run off to the beachfront, to this deserted stretch of beach, and there's this hut there. And so we see Saragina, and we understand that Saragina, based on the commentary information, right, Saragina was probably some kind of, she was a woman who was maybe a little bit impoverished, and she was a prostitute. And she was probably a prostitute for many of the sailors there. So that's why she was living in the hut in the beach. And so, so she's, I think, understood to be some kind of image of maybe a kind of earthy sexuality and a sexual awakening, at least for these young boys, and in particular for Guido. And we see this because we see the boys go to her hut and say, Saragina, Saragina, and then one of the boys says, do the Roomba. And we see one of the boys give her some money. And once she's given the money, she says, okay, I'll do the Roomba. Or she doesn't say it, but it's all unspoken. And then the music suddenly starts. This is a very important moment for me in this film, because what we see is we see for the first time Saragina emerge. And she's in this dirty, torn up black dress, completely out of sync with the surroundings, which is this beach. Her hair is huge and disheveled, and she's got this very how should I put it? It's not overly well, maybe slightly corpulent. Let's put it that way. And she emerges like from the bowels of somewhere, and her face is just snarling. It's like, my goodness, what is this? What is? It's like a. I mean, it's almost like some kind of monster from the deep, almost, right? It's like so shocking. Like, what is going on here? And then we see the boys. One of the boys give her the money, and then the music starts, and she walks off frame. And then so when the music starts, and then we see the back of her head, and she turns towards the camera in this close up, and you see this face, and it's right. It's the face of the actress, Edra Gale, who's an American, who's an opera singer, but she was here in Italy. And you should check out some of the supplements, because you see an interview with her, and her Italian is really wonderful. I don't speak Italian, but she speaks more than one language, and she's an opera singer here. But anyway, so she plays Saragina, and we see her, and she's all made up. It's like blackened lipstick or whatever, and the eyebrows and all that. And we see immediately, gosh, Carla looked a lot like Saragina in those early scenes, and also when she was in her fever and she was all hair disheveled and stuff. So we see Carla looking a lot like Saragina, and so we can understand that Guido's maybe sexual tastes maybe tend towards something that looks like Saragina. And why is that? Because we see emerging here Saragina, and she immediately becomes, at least in my mind, someone that was initially looking, I mean, to be perfectly blunt, for me, she was looking somewhat hideous. But when she starts to dance, and the music starts, and she starts to slowly sway her shoulders like that, and then she doesn't rip her bodice necessarily, but she basically tugs down her shoulder straps in a way to slightly reveal the shirt underneath. It's not even her chest, it's the shirt underneath. She doesn't show any nudity, and she doesn't even show any glimpse of nudity, like any kind of shot of cleavage or anything like that. It's just a very innocent tugging of her dress. It's almost it's like she's tugging at her suspenders almost. She doesn't have suspenders, but it's almost like that. And then she's swaying and she's doing this and she's swaying her body, and then she's getting into this dance, this rhythm, and the music suddenly swells with the rumba. And then she suddenly goes into this frenzied delight of dancing. And I love that moment so much, because at that moment, at that very moment, Saragina is the most beautiful woman in the world. Right, let me repeat. At that moment, Saragina is the most beautiful woman in the world. And I believe that. It's just one of the most beautiful moments because it's such a transformation. I was so taken by the fact that she seemed to me at the very outset to be so hideous looking, right, in terms of her appearance. But then when she gets into it and she does her rumba, she becomes the most beautiful woman in the world. And then she is the most beautiful woman in the world. And then even at the end, when Guido is caught and he is punished, and they catch him in a way that suddenly, the two of them are chasing Guido around, and suddenly the camera sped up. It's like Keystone Cops or some kind of silent film slapstick. And then they're carrying him off. And then he's in the confession, and then he's got the dunce cap on. He's humiliated in front of the boys and at school, and then his mother's called in, and it's this whole terrible thing, and he's made to go into the confessional, and they're told, Saragina is the devil, didn't you know? All this terrible stuff. Okay. But even after that entire ordeal, you know what happens? He goes back to the beach, and Saragina, and he sees her sitting alone on the beach. She's looking out into the ocean and just humming a tune to herself, which we understand to be the tune of the song, the theme of this film, the Nino Rota theme. And he is sitting there in a distance looking at her, but she notices him, right? Because we see her turn and we see her look back at him, and then she smiles. And that's it. That's the Saragina sequence. And so for me, that sequence is so important because it seems to show so much about this film, about Guido, and about Fellini, everything, right? That this idea of the Fellini-esque look, this idea of sort of maybe corpulent or heavyset women with very striking figures coming in, and they have very striking, almost scary looking images or appearances at first, but then they strike a pose, if you will, or they transform, or they blossom, if you will, or maybe blossom is an appropriate word to describe it, because I think the beauty was there from the very beginning. And it's so amazing. It's like Fellini just turns the camera, or turns our perspective just so much that we see something that is seemingly ugly at first, and it becomes something that is suddenly beautiful, right? And it happens in a split second like that. And so we understand, or at least I understand immediately, why Guido is so infatuated with this image of Saragina. And in fact, we understand also from the supplemental commentary that Fellini also had a very similar episode when he was younger. And so we see not only the past, the present, and the future emerge, like I was mentioning before, but we also see the filmmaker in the film and the filmmaker, the artist outside the film, Fellini, merged together. And then to make it even more triply complicated, we see the viewer, my interaction with that particular moment. And so I find this Saragina rumba to be so critical in the context of my attempts at understanding this film, 8½. And I love that moment. It's not available on the soundtrack that I have, and I don't think it is available. And I think it has to do with, I'm not an expert in Nino Rota's score, but anyway, yeah, if you know the specific reason why it's not included on the soundtrack, please let me know, but that is really great. Anyways, thank you, Anita Bonghit 2.0, for bringing that, reminding me of that with your comment about Nino Rota's score. I really appreciate it. Genealogy Mad, hello, my friend. And Oh, Justin Peterson says that the biggest part that left me scratching my head was at the end with the whole marching band that forms. Okay, so I'll try to get to that moment in a second. A touch of film, my friend. A touch of film. Hello, and you say two wonderful additions you have there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's see. Just going over the comments here again. I'm skipping around. Peter Cacciola says the beginning reminded me of Eraserhead, then Divine. Divine, I'm assuming you're talking about Divine, the in the John Waters film. So yeah, actually Divine, actually, you know what? Saragina and Divine have very similar characteristics, I think. And I say that in a very complimentary way. But I love Divine. I really love Divine. And I love Saragina. And let's see, just again, skipping around. Oh, yes, Jack Clare says, I think the thing that makes the film so hard to navigate is that it is a film without a moral yardstick, so to speak. Everything is presented ambivalently. Okay, that's very interesting, and I would again draw your attention to the moments that I was talking to earlier with respect to Jacqueline Bonbon in the dream sequence, and also with respect in that same sequence to the revolt, and also with respect to how Guido seemingly rejects Carla at the end there, as moments where even within the fantasy or dreams, Guido is not necessarily seen in a positive light. And I think those are, while not necessarily, how should I put it? I don't think those moments are overall maybe satisfactory, maybe 100% completely satisfactory to those who are trying to look for some kind of interpretation of this film that lends itself nicely to a kind of moral dilemma. I think at the same time, though, there is a suggestion, at the very least, of a kind of for lack of a better phrase, moral judgment that is being made on the character of Guido. So, but anyway, take of that what you will. So, and then Jack Clare, you also say, one of the things that I find most interesting about is the odd notes of comedy, i.e. Guido making funny little noises, almost clowning around it sometimes. Yes, gestures are very important in this film. And before I go to the comments, before I forget, let me say that also, when you see the film again, note the gestures that Guido uses. So, for instance, there's some little things that he does, like, early in the film when he's seen walking down the corridor of the hotel before he's on his way to the elevator. We see him. This is after, I think, the dream that he had of his parents and in the graveyard, or the mausoleum, or the graveyard. But after that dream sequence, we see him walking down the corridor. It's kind of darkly lit, but then we see him doing the little thing with his foot, the little with his foot, which is really cool. I wish I could do that with my foot. It's one of the many bucket list items I want to do, is be able to learn how to do that. So when I walk down a hallway, an empty corridor in a hotel, I'll be able to do that. Whistle like that sort of thing. I think that's so cool. Oh gosh, Marcello Mastroianni is so cool in this film. But and so there's that little gesture there. But that's very interesting because we also hear he's also whistling Rossini, right? The Barber of Seville, right? If I'm not mistaken. So this is very important because it seems like the gesture and his whistling is linking to a moment that happened early in the film, right? Because the first time we see Claudia Cardinale, if you recall, what do we hear on the soundtrack? Rossini, Barber of Seville. So it's almost like he is recalling Claudia Cardinale without necessarily showing the image of Claudia Cardinale. So that is very interesting. So that's in the gesture. And that's an example of why some of the gestures are really important. Incidentally, if you go into the supplements, you'll find that it was planned that Claudia Cardinale would actually appear as an image here, or as a vision in that particular sequence, but I think it was cut out, or it wasn't necessarily completed for whatever reason. Incidentally, also, you'll find that in the photograph section of this of the supplements here, there's an interesting information provided by Dina Boyer, 200 Days of 8.5 author, and the photographer who provided a lot of the photographs. And according to her, apparently Claudia Cardinale couldn't ride a bicycle. So I thought that was very interesting. So anyway, what was I saying? So the gestures, yes. Jack Clare is talking about. It's interesting. There are many comic kind of gestures in this film, but and there's also a scene where Guido is talking with Luisa at the cafe when Carla comes, and they're having this. It's a continuation of the fight that they had the previous night. Right, the previous night, remember, Louisa came and visited him in the hotel, and at first they're very happy and they're very cordial to each other and almost loving to each other, but then suddenly Louisa's mood turns so coldly all of a sudden, and at the moment we don't know why, but then we realize at night what probably happened was she probably saw Carla in the streets, and so she put two and two together in her head because, she knew that they had an affair, and she suspects that they are still having an affair. So the fact that she is also here suggests to her that she is here also because they are continuing their affair at the very moment that she is also visiting. So that's why she's angry. So then the next day they're in the cafe, and then Carla comes in that really odd, ornate horse carriage, and that there's a Nino Rota music, da music, and then yes. So when we see Luisa talking with Guido, Guido's just listening. He's just kind of fidgeting in his chair, but he's not looking at her, and he's doing this with his fingers. He's doing this with his nose. He's going like this, right? And that's a seemingly innocent gesture, and it's kind of comic too. He's just kind of like a child in that moment, but it's like Pinocchio. And he's saying throughout that entire conversation, no, the affair ended 3 years ago. I don't know. She's just here by chance. I don't know why she's here. He's going like this, right? And it's like Pinocchio and his nose growing, right? I think that's great. And in fact, there's a scene earlier in the film, I forget where exactly, but maybe it's in the hotel room that serves as a kind of office space for the production of the film. But we see him putting on a fake nose, I think, as well. So there are these little gestures that recall Pinocchio, or the story of Pinocchio. And, what happens to Pinocchio when he tells a lie, right? What happens here to Guido when he tells a lie? I mean, his nose doesn't grow in actuality, but he's making a gesture that makes maybe some kind of subtle allusion there too. So anyway, Jack Clare, thank you very much for that great comment. Again, just skipping down here. It's okay. Just keep going here. Sorry about this. Yes, Anita Bong Hit 2.0 says the camera work is like fluid, so graceful. Yes, I agree. So we have to remember Gianni Di Venanzo, the cinematographer Gianni Di Venanzo. Very important, very important. So yes. Rob Tapscott says, I love the cinematography. Yes, very important. And also remember the cinematography, this idea not only of the use of camera work and the movements, but also light, darkness, shadow. Shadows seem to appear a lot. Reality seems to be cloaked in lots of bright lights and sunshine. Whereas the past seems to be, there's a lot of shadow and a lot of huge shadows on walls, etc. So when you look at the film again, see how shadows and light work is being played around with, and how that seems to maybe suggest something, or maybe not, I don't know, of a kind of temporal shift in the film as that occurs. But in any event, it's an example of why the camera work is so important. So you guys are absolutely right. You are so on top of this. Well done. Well done. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Yes, Kevin Browning says, Fellini, I believe, stated that he starts out with an idea, but as the film progresses, allows the film to take on a life of its own. 8.5 trillion represents that artistry. That's a very interesting way of putting it. Very interesting indeed. Yes, and there is a discussion here about what the title refers to. So 8.5, what does it mean? According to the supplements, The original title, or one of the planned titles, was supposed to be The Beautiful Confusion. The Beautiful Confusion. So that's an interesting thing. So The Beautiful Confusion. Let's see. Okay, so Nazrin Prot says something very interesting here. So, directorial self-indulgence can lead to the great stuff, which I think the point is of this film. You don't get the great stuff without the crazy. That's very interesting, Nazrin Prot. And self-indulgence is a very key, opportune, perfect word to describe this film. It is very self-indulgent on the part of Fellini. Very self-indulgent. Now, if that's good or bad, that's another question. But undoubtedly, it is self-indulgent. Let's see. And there's a discussion here that's initiated by Jack's question, which is great. So he's saying he doesn't necessarily see Christianity figuring into this film, although he is welcome for a discussion. And so I think this is, we do see it, right, with the attempts at by Guido to seek answers from the cardinal. We see him talking with the cardinal twice in the film, and I think neither time Guido seems to be getting any answers. We also see flashbacks, of course, to Guido's childhood and his Christian upbringing, or Catholic upbringing, excuse me. And we also see some aspects creeping in, like, for instance, when they're in the nightclub scene, there's a question asked, do you believe that it's one of those it's seemingly meaningless questions, much like many of the questions later in the press conference scene with all the reporters. But this happens earlier in the film, and one of the Americans asks, do you believe that Italy is inherently a Catholic country, and all this stuff goes on. So I think it's there. It has a little bit of a, it's there because it's always been there, but it doesn't necessarily provide the answers to Guido, at least according to how I see the film. So anyway, Eric Pieper, hello Eric. You say Friedkin's favorite Fellini, also Scorsese's. Coppola ran this for his wife during the turbulence of Apocalypse Now, and both felt it was the best thing about filmmaking. Oh, very interesting observation. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's great, really great. Paul Emery says, this may be off the wall, but my eyes are open to appreciate Fellini by Stardust Memories. No, that's not off the wall at all. That's not off the wall at all. It's very, right, Stardust Memories is a film that I think quite directly borrows a lot from Fellini, in particular from 8½. Very much so, very much so. Great. Okay, thank you. Sorry about this. Yes. Okay. So All Things Film, hello. M.E., hello. It's nice. Yes, Ian is here. Yes, Anita Bonghit 2.0 also says, I feel Fellini had such a good time with the filmmaking that most of the work shown is inside jokes and references that only Fellini and peers would get. He made it for him, not us, which is great. Yes, so there are moments, for instance, where, Snapperats, right? I think that's an inside joke, which maybe Segulp and Yak and stuff. I understand that Fellini, in his earlier days, was a cartoonist, and he drew comic strips, and he might have been borrowing a lot from that. And there are many elements of that I don't necessarily get. Yak and Segulp, and all that. Asa Nishimasa, I'm not even sure if that is something. That's another example. It's not necessarily a inside joke per se, but it's an example of what I think you're alluding to, Anita Bonghit 2.0, which is about the elusiveness of many of the aspects of this film. And perhaps we're not meant to know anything. And that is emblematic of Asa Nishimasa, is it not? I think the reasonable, or not reasonable, the most accepted interpretation of that, critical accepted interpretation of that, is that Asa Nishimasa seems to be referring to anima, Asa Nishimasa, or anima. And I think a lot has been made which is referred to quite brilliantly in the commentary track. You should listen to it if you haven't already. It's brilliant. But a lot has been made about anima and Jung, Carl Jung, and the anima, and female aspects of the psyche, and anima projections, right? And the projectionist, the anima projectionist, Maya, and Maya being the name of the clairvoyant who is accompanying the magician played by Ian Dowds, which you see in the film. So all this, and Fellini was himself, I think, in analysis at the time, or very close to the time that he was making 8.5, at least according to the supplemental features, and so, or the commentary. And so there's all this stuff that can be interpreted, but at the same time, it means nothing. It means nothing, and it means something that perhaps we, as viewers, are not supposed to get. Asa nisi masa, snapperats, sagulp, yak, exactly. All these details are there, and Anita Bongya 2.0. I love your comment. Great, really great. Yes, Nazarene Prod says the spaceship is sort of like a shipwreck. It's the thing they can't escape from. That's very interesting, and that brings me to the end sequence. And I think Justin Peterson was asking, what does this end sequence mean? And to be perfectly frank, I have no idea. I really have no idea what the end sequence means. It's interesting to note that there might have been a different ending planned for this film. And there's a great documentary that's included on the supplemental features here that you should check out called The Last Sequence. And the last sequence was apparently supposed to be some kind of sequence to take place on a train. But instead, we have the sequence that takes place here around the construction structure of the spaceship that was never going to be completed. And so we see this sequence come at a very important part of the film, right? It's a very important part of the film because after the disastrous press conference, where all the chaos is running wild, right? We see Guido with a gun, a pistol, crawling under the table, and we hear a gunshot, and we assume that he has shot himself. Now, it's a very ambiguous moment, right? Does he really kill himself? Is it just in a dream? I have no idea. I think either interpretation is valid. But in any event, that is a death in a metaphorical sense as well, because that is immediately followed by the scene in which we discover that the film has been abandoned. The film is no longer going to be made. And so everything has to be torn down. And so it's been abandoned. And then we get the shots of the carpenter there dancing, which is really charming. And there's a nice story about that in the commentary, by the way, really great about that. And Gideon Bachman describes who that person is. And then we get Guido talking with the film critic in the car, and the critic and writers talking about how, the nobility of the artist to destroy something, to destroy that thing, rather than create something that is artistically incomplete, or something like that, or something like that. I to be perfectly honest, it's very difficult for me to follow exactly what he's saying, but something along those lines, right? And so he's talking about the nobility of art, and it's almost like, I consider you as an artist, right? Because he sees this thing, and he's been very critical of this work from the very get-go, and yet he sees him destroy it at the very end. And we realize that Guido is sort of accepting that this film is not going to work out at all. And then we see the close-up of Guido in his face, and we see him in the car alone, and it's a voiceover in his head. And then we see him saying, basically accepting his confusion. The entire work, 8.5, was one way of looking at it. His attempt of trying to put order into his life, which was in a state of confusion. He was trying to put some kind of order. I mean, a film is in many ways like that. A film is like a creative endeavor in trying to piece together disparate elements that are chaotic and put them in a way that is in a concise form, that's like a 2-hour film that can be processed and consumed and appreciated by other people. I mean, I think that's what a film is. It's a work, right? It's a work of assembling certain ideas, images, and sounds in a way that is cohesive and can be understood by people other than yourself, okay? So if we think of the film, the process of making a film like that, then we can, at least I can see the film, 8½, being this story about Guido trying to make sense of stuff in his life and putting it in this metaphorical thing that we call a film. But he failed at the end. He failed at the end. So therefore, the assumption behind that failure is now, at the end of the film, he is left in the state of confusion. He is left in the state of confusion. Okay. But this is very important, right? Because, and this is also, I think, this is an interpretation that is tied in very nicely, I think, with Claudia Cardinale's character, right? Because remember, in the middle of the film, when we see the image of Claudia Cardinale come to him in his hotel room at night alone, we see her on the bed, and this is the first time we hear her voice, that beautiful kind of rough voice. Claudia Cardinale's voice is so lovely here. And she says, you know, I want to bring order. I want to clean. That's what she says in the vision. And so that is exactly what I think the film is meant to be. On a direct level, it was almost Guido's attempt at trying to bring order, trying to clean his life, as it were. And that was represented directly by the fact that he was trying to make a film to give a role to Claudia Cardinale's character, right? Perhaps in an attempt, maybe ultimately, in the short term, to go to bed with her, perhaps. But I think it was also, right, I mean, if we think of the sexual encounter as a physical act between one human being and another human being to connect, right? It was basically his way of trying to connect with someone, right? And what is a way of trying to connect with someone other than, let's say, trying to sift through the chaos and try to find some kind of order within the chaos? And I think a representation of that order is a connection between yourself and another human being. Okay, so it was this way of trying to connect with another human being, or try to connect with others, and trying to do so by cleaning up his life and cleaning up his confusion in a way that would lead to something that was clean and orderly. Okay, so that was, I think, his endeavor in trying to make the film. That's how I see it. But he fails at the end. He fails, right? This is very important. He fails. But in his failure as an artist, he has found success, right? Because in his monologue, his inner monologue, he says, right, and I'm paraphrasing, it's so lovely to hear the Italian. I don't understand Italian, but it's so lovely to hear the Italian as Marcello Mastroianni speaks it. But as I'm paraphrasing, as I'm looking at the subtitles, he says something along the lines of, you know, what is this? I'm trembling. What is this feeling that I suddenly have? I feel suddenly alive and free, and everything is open before me. I realize who I am. I realize that, you know, things are how they are. Maybe not as how they should be, but as they are, as who I am. And this is who I am. I am nothing but what I am now. And what I am now, right, at the end of this film is this confusion, this state of confusion. But, excuse me here. There we go. I'm in the state of confusion. But this is who I am. So if I can somehow connect with you as I am now, then I will do my best. And then as this is happening, we see an image of Louisa, his wife, coming in close. And this is very important too, because this is not the real Louisa, right? This is an image or vision of Louisa, and they are not, and he is not talking, he is thinking his words, but then he is seemingly imagining her talking back, and she responds in his mind, perhaps saying, I don't know if what you said is right, but I will try. And then that's great. It's a great connection. He makes a connection with Louisa, not in real terms, but in this world of 8½. Now, query whether indeed the real Guido and the real Louisa have actually made up in real life. I think the implication is that they've left each other, and perhaps their relationship is never to be mended again. But in this world that ends the film, we then cut to the assembly of all the characters that have emerged in this process. Before that, this is very important. We see, as Guido is making his monologue, we see Claudia Cardinale on the beach in white on this side, the right-hand side of the film. But then we see something very important. We see the other characters, Carla, Saragina, and others, dressed in white now, and they occupy the other side of the frame in a separate shot. And as Claudia Cardinale walks alone from right to left, the other characters proceed walking from left to right. This is very important, and they are also now dressed in white. So it seems like now he has accepted them, or this confused state is something that he has accepted. And this is exemplified the fact that they are now also wearing white, the idealized white shirts and dresses. Okay, and then they are seen entering the world of this procession, right? And Ian Dallas, the magician, welcomes them as the master of ceremonies. And then it's this one long shot. It's this one continuous take. There's no cut. We see Guido walking in there. He's acting like the director with his bullhorn, and he's waving his hat, and he's going around, and we see the little marching band with the little boy who is also Guido. So we see the man, the 40-something man, and the little boy. So he is a little boy at heart, but he is directing them, and he's interacting with the little boy. It's an amazing moment, and it's all in one take. And then as the music swells and the camera is still on one take, the curtain opens, and we see all these characters walk down from descending the steps of the spaceship construction site, and they're walking down, and suddenly, and it's reminiscent of the spa sequence in the middle of the film. And even in the spa sequence, the camera followed the commendatore, the producer, and here it follows all the characters, but then it follows, for whatever reason, the producer, or the person who played the producer. And then all the characters assemble, and then they are gathered together, and it's almost like it's this confused state, and it's not like a film, right? It's not like a narrative with order and cleanliness, but it's this confused state of stuff that's going on, but it is what he is. He is accepting his confused state, and therefore he is going to end it in this sort of confused state. But it's interesting, he is putting a little bit of order in this confusion. All these characters that were existing in different times and spaces within the context of the film up to now are in the same space. So it's the same confused order, but just celebrating it, and then ending the film with this great flourish. There are still moments of ambiguity here, of course. As I mentioned earlier, Guido tries to connect with his mother, but his mother rejects him. Carla tries to connect with Guido, but Guido seemingly rejects her. But it's all for that those moments are fleeting and they go away. And then the key moment is Guido makes the effort to go to Louisa. He walks to Louisa and he offers her his hand, and she hesitates for a moment, but then she takes it. And then they walk together and they join the procession together, led by Ian Dallas's magician, the master of ceremonies. And then we go around, and then the music swells, and it's the end. And this is very important. There's a moment where the magician takes Carla by the hand, and then he escorts her to the head of the line. And then it's great when you look carefully, but when you see them join the head of the line, we can see in the distance a cameraman operating a camera, a handheld camera, and zooming in on the magician's face as he's saying, "Let's go," and he waves his baton, "Let's go." And it's the cameraman, and it cuts to the close-up of the magician's face. I swear, the gesture is it's the same, such that I think that the footage that's used in the film for the close-up of the magician's face is the footage that was actually shot with that camera that we see in the distance that's actually being used during the procession. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion that footage was the footage that's actually being shot at that moment. And we see the magician, and we see Carla, and the procession starts, and they go walk. They dance away, and then Guido and Louisa join, and then we see that this is some kind of connection between them, and then they too join the procession, and it goes around, and it's light, and it suddenly becomes dark because there's maybe a flag that cuts through the frame, and then we suddenly see the band, and it's the boy, and it becomes dark, and then the spotlight's on them, and it's over. So the ending is this acceptance of confusion, the celebration of confusion. All the elements of confusion are there, and they're thrown in there. That is in a way that's great. But also, this is very important, and I think I've looked at this so many times, and I've tried to look at every detail of this sequence. Am I right? Am I wrong in thinking Claudia Cardinale is not in this final sequence, right? We see her, of course, alone in the bit where she's walking along the beach, right? We see her there. But in this final sequence with the spaceship, I don't think she's there. I don't think she's there. Check it out next time you see the film, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if she's not there, I think that lends so nicely to my reading of this film, which is the end is the celebration of confusion, because Claudia Cardinale has been a representation of order, of cleanliness. He wants to make the film in order to create some kind of order to reach her. So she even says in her vision, I want to bring order, I want to clean. But the fact that she's not there in this final sequence means that she is the antithesis of chaos, of confusion. So it's fitting that she's not there, because the end sequence is a celebration of chaos, a celebration of confusion. And thus, that is an acceptance of him as a character and who he is. And it's great, too, because he seems to abandon her in favor of trying to connect with his wife, Luisa. Great. So the fact that Claudia Cardinale is not in the sequence, if I'm right, I think is all the more fitting in terms of the context and themes and struggles and concerns that are being dealt with in this film. Auto Mezzo, 8.5. Okay, so it's almost been 2 hours, so let me just end with trying to get to your comments here. So anyway, Adieu says, hello from Swiss Daisuke. Sorry for my English, but I would like to thank you for all your videos, and I wanted to know what you think about Sono's Cinema, one of my favorite directors. Oh, thank you very much for your super chat. I'm very sorry. So Sono, I've been asked about him, but maybe I'll talk about it in another video. But thank you very much. Thank you so much for this. Wow. Gosh, thank you. Gosh. Carl Reese, hello. I'm sorry. I'm catching you at the tail end of this conversation, but hello, thank you so much for your comment about Claudia Cardinale. You say you saw her for the first time in The Leopard. I made it my mission to seek out some of her other films after that. The Leopard, of course. Once Upon a Time in the West, of course, yes. Great conversation here as always, my friends. Wonderful. I'm sorry, I'm just skipping around here because it's the time. Oh, Je vous aime, hello. Yes. Have you talked about Madeleine, aka the Snail Woman? I think it's a favorite character in the movie. Yes. Oops, sorry, I've just skipped. Gosh, sorry about this. Sorry. I'm just skipping over. Madeleine, you're talking about Madeleine LeBeau, right? So she's the French actress who is trying to get information about how many scenes she'll be in, and right, Guido says, "Oh, I think you'll be in 5 scenes." Yeah. Yes. Asa Nisimasa. Yes. This is great. Oh gosh, what a great JD. Hello, Danny C. Hello. Oh gosh, this is really great. You guys are. Oh, Sean Gallagher. Hello. Gosh, and if I missed out anyone saying hello to anyone, please forgive me. I'm just trying to catch as many comments here as possible. This is really great. JD is asking, how are you today? I'm doing fine. I'm doing really well, JD. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well. And CineArts, yes, CineArts. Hello. Yeah, CineArts says, you'll give the film another try very soon. I hope so. It's certainly worth it. Again, I share my own experience in that I hated the film when I first saw it. I hated it, but now I just love it. I love it. Oh, and Je vous aime, I'm sorry, you talked about Madeleine LeBeau, and right there, the moment when, in the harem, when Guido is using the whip, he whips off that little ornate thing on her hair, I think twice. So, yes, really fascinating. And I know it's not directly connected with her name, Madeleine, but right, Asa Nisimasa, the Madeleine, Rosebud, all these little things in Search for Lost Time and Citizen Kane, and Asa Nisimasa is in that category too. The thing, or maybe it's not a MacGuffin, but it's the thing that is it means everything and nothing, and. There's another great scene in this film that's so reminds me so much of Citizen Kane. I just want to mention before I end is when Luisa and Guido are having their fight in the hotel room, and we see them. They're in their two beds, and we just see them in close up, and they're fighting and they're arguing. And then at the end of that fight, we see a distant shot of them, and we see the distance between the two beds, and that always reminds me of that scene in Citizen Kane where the um, 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 Kane and Mrs. Kane are talking in the breakfast table, and they're close, and then they're slowly having their arguments over time, and then by the end of the sequence, we see how much distance is between them and their long breakfast table. I love that. And that saw it in 8.5 reminds me of that sequence so much, but and also Asanisi Masa and Rosebud. But anyway, so okay, so now it's been 2 hours, so let me just wrap up, and because it's time for me to walk my dog. So I want to say thank you very much, and once again I apologize for not addressing all of your comments here like I would like to, but the conversation looks really great, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining and for contributing. And you, gosh, oh yes, let me just say that Justin Peterson, my dears, happiness consists of being able to tell the truth without hurting anyone. Wow, what a as said by Guido. Wow, you know, right, and I think it was said a lot by some of the nieces in the office hotel room, and also by Claudia Cardinale's character in Reality 3 times. You know, you don't know how to love. Yes. Oh gosh, that's what he says about Guido. You know, you don't know how to love. Oh gosh. And at the end, he tries to find that connection of love between him and Louisa. And that's so touching to me. I find that ending to be so touching. The way he tries to reach out to Louisa. And I find it even more touching by the fact that we don't even know if it's real or not. And perhaps it doesn't have to be real or real or dream, right? Everything in that moment is all mixed together. It is reality and it is dream. It is Guido. It is Marcello. It is Guido and it is Fellini. It is us and it is them. Everything is intertwined and connected and there and not there at the same time in that sequence. So I find that sequence to be, at the end of the film, I find that sequence to be so fitting, a great time. So anyway, my friends, my dear friends, thank you so much. Let me end it there. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation about 8.5. If you have any more thoughts and comments about this, please feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video that will be up after this live stream is over. And until then, my friends, next week I think we are scheduled for the Red Shoes. Yes, the Red Shoes. So thank you very much. And until we meet again, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. And don't forget, right? Asa Nisimasa and Sigulp. So anyway, my friends, thank you very much. Sigulp. All right, so we're done. Great. So thank you, my friends, for joining us and for your great comments. It's been really wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, I hope that was okay. It's, as I say, it's a pretty tough film, but it's even I watched it. I've watched I don't know how many times, and I don't get. I don't think man. I can barely scratch the surface of this great film. I just can't get it. There's some things I can't get, but who knows? Maybe one day. I'll just have to keep trying, right? Okay, my friends, thank you, and have a great rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. I'm gonna go, and it's now 8 o'clock, so I've been talking for about 2 hours. So it's great. Thank you, my friends. So, oh gosh, it's still going. Yes, I think my battery just went out, so I'm just going to end it right now. So thank you very much, my friends, and talk to you again very soon.